Okay guys, we are starting our Unit 2 on rhythm, and that's where we get into the more specifics of notes and rests, and where we're going to learn their official names and what their value is, okay? So in our previous unit, we talked about measures, we talked about bar lines, and we talked about meter, the steady beat and meter, and how a meter signature, the top number in a meter signature tells us how many beats can be in every measure in music, and that's really important that you understand that, okay? But now we're gonna look specifically at these symbols. We have 10 of them, okay? So we're talking about rhythm in this unit, and a rhythm are the long and short sounds, or is the long and short sounds and silences in music, okay? And of course, any of this that I've written on the board, you need to write it in your music notes because you need to study it and you need to memorize these 10 symbols, okay? So again, rhythm is the long and short sounds and silences in music, okay? So the steady beat is the foundation in music. It stays steady, it can speed up, it can slow down, and on top of that, we have long and short sounds going on top of the beat, and that is our rhythm, those long and short sounds. Now sounds are shown by notes, and silences are shown by rests. So you need to make sure you know the difference between those two. Notes show us sound, and rests show us silences, okay? What I'm gonna go through is we're gonna take a look at this first section on notes. Make sure that you're copying them down. If you need to pause the video at any point, please do that. Okay, so we have this kind of note, first of all, that is just a circle. And remember, if I haven't said this before, that in order for it to be a note, there has to be some kind of a circle, okay? It could be colored in, it could have a stem or not. If it's not a circle, then it's gonna be some other symbol or a rest, okay? So notes have sound or show a sound, and this first note is just a circle, and it's called a whole note, and it gets 4 beats, okay? It gets 4 beats of sound. Our next note down is the half note, okay? It looks just like the whole note, but it has a stem on it. Now, a half note does not get a half of a beat. Its name is actually, it is named based on its relationship to the whole note. So a half note is worth half of a whole note. That's where the 2 comes in. Half of the number 4, if we cut the number 4 in half, we'd get 2, 2 and 2. So that's where that name comes from. A half note is worth half of a whole note. Not that it's worth half of a beat, okay? It gets 2 beats. Its value is 2. A quarter note gets 1 beat, okay? It's colored in and it has a stem and it gets 1 beat. Again, its name is based on its relationship to the whole note, okay? It's a quarter of what the whole note is worth. A quarter of 4 is 1. Okay, don't get it confused. It is not worth a fourth. This is not worth a half. A half note gets 2, a quarter gets 1. Now, before I move on to the 8th note and 16th note, let me show you really quickly. When you have notes on the music staff, do not let the direction of the stem throw you off. It really doesn't mean anything other than it's a rule about stems, let me tell you. When you're writing notes on the music staff, if you have notes that are below the 3rd line, then the stems, the rule says the stems are just to go up. But if you have a note on the 3rd line or above, then the stem has to switch directions and go down. So if you have a note where the stem's going up, that is a half note. If you have a note up above where the stem's going down, that is still a half note, even though the stem direction has changed. It doesn't change what kind of a note it is, okay? So don't let the stem direction confuse you. Okay, now moving on. So our 8th note is when we start getting into notes that are worth less than a whole beat, less than 1, okay? So an 8th note is just like a quarter note. It's colored in, it has a stem, but it has something called a flag on it. So I'm just gonna write the word flag right here. Okay, it has a flag on it. And an 8th note gets a half of a beat. It gets a fraction of a beat, okay? Now sometimes, lots of times actually, you will see two eighth notes beamed together. And when I say the word beam, I'm saying B-E-A-M, beamed together. So what happens is the two little flags join together and become a beam. So you guys have seen notes that look like this, okay? You may have called it a TT in elementary school. This is a pair of eighth notes. This is a single eighth note. One flag, one beam, and I'll write the word beam up here. That means that those are eighth notes. Now the reason why often you'll see two of them beamed together, joined together, is because that's how many it takes to get one beat, okay? So let's do a little math. A half, because remember an eighth note gets a half, plus another half is 1, okay? So that's why lots of times you'll see them joined together like that. Now the 16th note looks just like the 8th note, but it has two flags, okay? It's called a 16th note, and it's worth a quarter of the beat. And if you join more than one of them together, those two flags become two beams. So those are 16th notes, and that's a single 16th note, okay? So the reason why I joined 4 together is because that's how many it takes to get 1, to fill up just one beat. So that's a quarter, plus a quarter, plus a quarter, plus a quarter, or a fourth plus a fourth plus a fourth plus a fourth equals 1. Okay? If you need to, pause now, get all these copied down. Okay? If not, we're going on to rest. For every kind of note, there's also a rest. So there's a whole note and a whole rest, a half note and a half rest, a quarter note and a quarter rest, and so on. But the difference again is the note is going to show sound, okay, where we would sing or play an instrument. The rests are going to show where we're quiet, where we're silent, where we're not playing, where we're not singing, okay? And rests have value. Some people are like, when I ask the question, how much is this rest worth? Someone will say 0. Rests are worth something. They do have value. They have the same value as their note equivalent, okay? So they're never 0. So if you see a whole rest, that means you're going to be silent for 4 beats. If you see a half rest, you're going to be silent for 2. A quarter rest, silent for 1. An eighth rest, silent for a half of a beat. And a 16th rest, you're going to be silent for a quarter of a beat. Okay? So rest show us silence. Now, up here, a whole rest is basically a little rectangle hanging from a line. If you were to see that on a staff, it would be a little rectangle hanging from the 4th line of a staff. So I drew this in parentheses so you would see what it looked like on a staff, okay? Here we have a half rest, and it on a staff would be sitting on the 3rd line, okay? So that's a whole rest and a half rest. Now let me show you the difference. I don't know about you, but these two are very confusing because they're basically identical. One's just sitting one way and the other's sitting the other way, okay? So this is how I remember this. I think of this as looking like a top hat. And this one, the half rest is the top hat on my head, and the whole rest is the top hat off of my head, okay? So when I think of a top hat, I think of magicians, I think of bunnies coming out of rabbits, okay? So what I think of is if I have a whole rest and my top hat is off of my head, then I can stuff 4 bunnies in that top hat and carry them around and they won't fall out. However, if I go to put that top hat on my head, 2 of those bunnies, as I'm turning it upside down, 2 of those bunnies are going to fall out before I can get it on my head, and I'm left with 2 bunnies. So if the top hat is off the head, it can hold all 4 bunnies. But if it's on my head, 2 fall out, and it can only hold 2 bunnies. That's what I use to remember the difference between how many beats a half rest, how many beats a whole rest and a half rest can get, okay? Now a quarter rest is basically a Z with a C on the bottom. That's how I draw that. So if you have trouble doing that, that's how you do it. A Z with a C on the bottom. It gets 1 beat of silence. This is basically the number 7 with a fancy dot on the end. It's how I draw that one. It's an eighth rest, and it gets half of a beat of silence. And then a 16th rest, just like an eighth note gets one flag, a 16th note gets two. An eighth rest has one flag, a 16th note gets two. So that's the eighth rest. You add the second flag to it, and it's a 16th rest. Okay? So you need to make sure you get these copied down. We're going to be spending some time looking at the relationship between these, and then we're also going to make sure that we get these memorized. You need to know what these symbols are, okay, and how much they're worth, okay? Whole notes and rests always get 4. Half notes and rests get 2. Quarter notes and rests get 1, and so forth and so on, okay? And in the next assignment, I'm going to show you, talk to you about making flashcards to help you memorize these, because I found that that's the easiest way for students to get these memorized and learn them. And this is brand new to a lot of you, okay? So the only way you're going to learn these is pure memorization. So you just have to quiz yourself. And if you have flashcards, you can sit down for about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes a night, and just zip through them and memorize these, okay? So your next assessment that we're going to do at Unit 2, you really need to have these memorized because these are going to be on your assessment, okay? So make sure you do that. If you have any questions, email me.